Hello everybody, this is Dr. Brockenshire, and in this installment we're going to spend some time talking about some new discoveries with respect to how the cell makes energy and what's going on with the spleen. The spleen is one of those organs that doesn't get a lot of attention, but if you've been working on your fellow humans over the last couple of years, you've noticed some things going on with the spleen and the stomach spleen meridian particularly. And so there's a lot of questions that need answering. And as you see while we'll go through this, that some of those answers come in the most unlikely places. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Here we go. As usual, I have to tell you that basically I am a clinician. I'm not a researcher. I'm not giving you medical advice. I'm not liable for any errors or omissions, etc. So this keeps us within our group of friends and all working towards our higher purpose, if you will, of helping the most people do the best work. And so when we start our journey in healthcare, hopefully we were all taught that food is medicine. And we had our pioneers like Royal Lee, Weston A. Price, and Pottinger. And a lot of what they discovered and worked on in the 1920s and 30s has saved our bacon, so to speak, for a long time. But today things are different. Just from the standpoint of we're different people. We're not the humans that they worked on or researched. And more importantly is to realize that that whole idea that food is medicine is true. However, today food has become poison for many people. And so your average person who's trying to eat healthy is really getting exposed to a lot of things that their cellular mechanics have never seen before. And that takes us into this concept of the exposome or exposomics. And so when you look at functional medicine and you do some of the literature review and dig into some of the current research, this is a beautiful chart from a study that talks about the exposome. And what it boils down to is it looks at all of the data available that can explain what's happening to the human genome and the human metabolism and how are we failing as an organism. And so what I love about this study is it talks about a lot of the things that most of us have already been doing. It could actually get into, you could draw some correlations between homotoxicology and this one particular study. And you can see the study at the bottom of your screen from the Environment International Journal, which is a 2017 study. But if you look at this, it talks about things on the outside, chemicals and events. And so events, that's a key component here because this is the first medical study I've seen that talks about things, events, feelings, emotions, situations, stress that happen in our environment. So they're going on record saying that, you know what, maybe the emotional matrix actually plays a role in our biochemistry. And then when you follow the chart, you look at other stressors, things going on inside the body. And so for those of you that work on patients that may have tried a detox in a box and they felt worse, and we talk about that progressive vicariation event, disturbing or spreading of poisons throughout the body in different locations. This one study pretty much validates everything I've been doing for the last 20 years. And then you pull in the microbiome and you look at the detailed adaptive stress response that the cell does. And this explains to me, it jumps out at me anyways, that one of the things that's happening to our patients is they're running out of or they're depleting their adaptive energy. And so as a good nutritional clinician or a chemist, you start to think, well, how can we recharge adaptive chemistry? And you start thinking about adaptogens like rhodiola, echinacea, turmeric, Korean ginseng, gynostemma. You start thinking about, well, what vitamins recharge the cell? You're going to have to talk about B vitamins. And so the final chart in this study looks at, from left to right, your exposures all the way down to the outcomes. And so it's a pretty cool chart. You look through it and you go, wow, we've got transcription issues, measurement issues, proteomics, Dr. Jeffrey Bland would love this chart. But what jumped out at me was the 6 main boxes up top, from external exposure to adverse outcome, made me immediately think of a different chart, one that's a little more familiar to us. And that is your chronic biotoxicosis or homotoxicology chart, where we have our 6 different regions of compensation and degeneration. And so when we look at it that way, again, we look at these 6 boxes here: exposure on the outside, exposure on the inside, specific target exposure, think maybe vaccine or insect bite. And then we have our responses, and then the adverse outcome. And you compare it to this chart, and let's just say we'll pick on the nervous system. We have our exposures, the things that we might notice from a symptom point of view, but at the end of the day, we see the end result or degenerative response. I thought, wouldn't you know it, here we go, we're back to homotoxicology. We're already equipped to deal with this. So you can't tell me that this is just a review of biotoxicosis. We've got the tools to handle this already. So I had to change my thinking a bit and realize, wait a minute, before we start recharging situations, maybe we should clean the terminals, so to speak. If you're a battery, you got to make sure your terminals are clean. If you're working with lasers, you got to make sure the optics are clean, or you're looking at disaster. So before we run out and we start grabbing adaptive energy and recharging our cells, I'm going to suggest that if you want to address the modern patient, you really don't have a choice but to look at biotoxicosis again and come at it using lymph 1, 2, or 3, or in some cases, a combination of them. So again, a strange review or reintroduction into this concept, but you know, the research is solid. It's basically proving what we've known all along, which puts the pressure on us to get back to basics, review the essentials, and use the lymph remedies properly. This morning, we redesigned my nutritional remedy sheets in the office to have a pre-printed spot for lymph 1, 2, and 3. So the practitioner just has to circle which one are we going to use. Each visit it might change, but that way we never forget to bring the lymph remedies in. And in our sheet, there's a section that says what the remedy is being used for. And it's pre-printed now. It says to support bioenergetic drainage. So people are only going to benefit from this aha moment. And Bruce Lipton, hopefully, is familiar to you. When we look at this exposome idea and homotoxicology, biotoxicosis, this statistic really hits home into the power of this kind of work, because while we are made up of genes and the genes hold information, we are not our genes. We're really the expression of those genes based on the environment. So when you do the math, you're thinking of about 30,000 times to the 30,000 power, or 30,000 different permutations of our genes. So you might be thinking, well, MTHFR is a big deal. COMT is a big deal. VDR could be a big deal. CYP enzymes are a big deal. All genes are a big deal. But what's a bigger deal is how they respond to your environment. And one of the key ways they do that is through energy dispersion and energy creation. So at this point, if you're kind of banging your head against the wall going, what the heck are we talking about? What I'm really talking about is how to get the cell to make energy so the body can do what it was designed to do, and that is fully express itself. So while we're studying some of the genetic stuff, we come across methylation, and you can see whether you want to call it over or under methylating or poor methylation, methylation deficiency, it's up to you. Everybody could be considered. If you've done any homework over the last 15 years on this topic, you've probably learned what you need to know to be a good clinician. But when you look at these symptoms and you look at how some people actually do worse when they supplement with B12, folate, and B6, you start to wonder, is there really something else going on here besides just methylation? Would we call it, say, a histamine sensitivity, Is it a neurotransmitter issue? All of those questions are true, but I want to look at it from a different point of view. Another study I was looking at was talking about because of methylation, a lot of us don't use B vitamins as well as we could. And so these are some of the symptoms from an impaired B vitamin usage. And when you look at these, you start to think, well, wait a minute. Mold toxicity can cause these. Lyme can cause these. Mono, Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, mycoplasmas, pneumonia, flu, adrenal imbalances. I think, wait a minute. Are they all connected? ADD, ADHD. So could it be that simple? Well, if we take out the genetics for a second and just look at, from a medical textbook, what are the symptoms of a B vitamin deficiency? Is it because we're not using them? Is it because we're not absorbing them? Is it because it's the wrong form? Is it D, all of the above? The answer is D, of course, all of the above. But look at these symptoms for a minute and ask yourself, if you went into your doctor's office complaining of all these symptoms, how far would you really get? Particularly that last one. A lot of people are walking around with symptoms over here, and these people really need some help. But it can't be that easy. It can't just be a B vitamin issue. And let me stop you right there, because if you're thinking, okay, B vitamins, we've got B1, B2, B3, niacin, riboflavin, thiamine, folate. There's other B vitamins that don't begin with B. What about choline or inositol? So on and so forth. So let's take a road a little windy and walk through methylation and back over to Bs. Some of the symptoms of an imbalanced methylator. And at this point, just understand that most of us have imbalanced methylation, whether or not you have the genes for it. Understand that you can have an imbalanced methylation system even if you don't have impaired MTHFR, okay? We got to get that through our heads. You don't need genetic variation in order to be an impaired methylator. For example, alcoholics have impaired methylation. Carboholics have impaired methylation because of their depletion of methyl factors. Right there should just blow your mind for a second, because we get so focused on the MTHFR paradox, and we don't realize that some of the sickest people we treat have fantastic genes, and some of the healthiest people we know look awful on paper. So it's all up to the cell. If you're struggling with the whole anxiety panic situation, we really got to pay attention to that, because B vitamin deficiency is what allows that to happen. So from a, let's say, an ICD-10 point of view, let's look at some of the diseases that go with this. And I like to focus in on neural tube defects. As a chiropractor, things that involve the nervous system are near and dear to me. And when you see neural tube defects, I want you to think midline defects. So any midline defect, it could be cleft palate, tongue tie. You might see variations in skull formation, things like Marfan's or a slight caving in of the chest cavity, so on and so forth. If you see these things, you start to wonder, this goes pretty far, because one of the greatest threats to our healthcare system is this stuff, Alzheimer's and dementia, neurologic degeneration. B vitamins play a huge role here. And understand that in Western medicine, in the Western world, when you use pharmacologic medicine, when you use meds, most prescribed medications deplete B vitamins. In fact, that's how some of them work. So if your patients are using B vitamins as a supplement, they may be helping themselves, they may be hurting themselves. But at the very least, if they're on medications, they're outperforming the medication if they're supplementing with Bs. And so the problem with supplementing with Bs is, how do we know which one to use and when? Because some can make people worse, some make people better. It's really wild out there. For example, if you've got a chronic mono infection, but you also have herpes and you're taking, say, Valtrex on a daily basis to suppress the virus, if you give them high doses of B vitamins, you can actually make them worse. So dosage becomes an issue, but so does the recipe and how you blend things. And so some of the big things in my office that we use to assess situations like this are simple in-office tests, and one of them is a nitric oxide test strip. And you can buy these online. Just Google nitric oxide test strips. It's a little saliva strip. What you do is you put saliva on the pad, and the pad turns pink or it doesn't. People with low nitric oxide levels also mimic low B vitamin levels. So this is one way to in-office test saliva to see if they're low in B vitamins. And you need B6, 12, and folate in order to make healthy nitric oxide levels. You also need quite a bit of L-arginine. And so obviously we're going to need to look at protein and diet. But if you have patients with these symptoms, you have to test them for nitric oxide. You have to discuss the B vitamin status. This is a big deal. So ways to fix an impaired nitric oxide, obviously they need methylated folate, B6 and B12. Ginkgo goes a long way, gynostemma, L-arginine. But the number one way to stimulate nitric oxide production is intense exercise. But frankly, if you're low on B vitamins, the last thing you want to do is exercise. A lot of people say when they take a B complex in high dose, they feel a buzz. They have a surge of energy. But they're some of the most fatigued people you'll ever meet. And that's because the B vitamins they're taking are actually causing further depletion downstream. Much like our homotoxicology chart, what they're doing is they're just spreading the problem around. So we need a better way to look at this.
In this challenge, we need to find a way to assess B vitamin status, which means we're also going to be looking at mitochondrial status and most likely adrenal status, since all of those are related to the B vitamins. And keep in mind that blood sugar status and B vitamins go hand in hand. So one of the easiest tests to apply to the patient using manual muscle testing is something that isolates out of all of these variables and accesses the muscle subclavius. So subclavius is just under the collarbone or clavicle. And the way we do that is you have the patient hold their arms above the head, put your thumbs together, keep them there, and have the patient open and close their hands a few times. Keep the thumbs like that and pump your hands. 5 times is enough. Now don't let me pull your arms apart, okay? I'm going to be pulling directly laterally. Don't let me pull. Good. That's a very difficult test, but you passed. You can relax your arms. Most people flunk that test. And an easy question to ask is, when you're working overhead or you're washing your hair, do your hands get tired or do your arms go numb? And if the answer is yes, you're going to want to look at their B vitamin status. And one of the easiest ways to correct that is just administer some B vitamins in the office, either orally or just with touch. Retest that muscle and it should go into strength. Now another good test for this is to do it forward, where we're going to isolate pec and delt. And so I want you to put your thumbs together that way. So at 90 degrees here, she's squeezing in on her thumbs. Now I'm going to try and pull apart. Ready? Don't let me. I want you to squeeze as hard as you can. Alright. So we have a weakness. Now that's a secondary blood sugar test that we use that also correlates with B vitamins. So we have our arms over our head, thumbs together, and we have our thumbs together at 90 degrees. In which case, all of these tests are addressing the subtle muscles of the shoulder. In my opinion, in clinical practice, those have been the 2 muscle tests that are reliable for challenging B vitamin status outside of looking at blood sugar or adrenal function.
So it helps to have some essential foundation when it comes to medical B vitamin status. So you can do blood tests for Bs. They're not always reliable. For example, if you were to test vitamin B1, thiamine, you're going to find that most people are deficient in thiamine. One of the main reasons is carbohydrates, sugar. Causes a thiamine deficiency. People that drink too much alcohol, I mean, I'm not sure what too much is according to the British. It keeps changing, but a good baseline is 1 to 2 drinks a day. If somebody's having more than 14 drinks a week, you could consider that their nutrition will be affected because of the alcohol. So we can test for B12 in the blood. B6 is often checked. But it helps to know why we're even looking at these things. So fundamentally, not to shock everybody, but if you can visualize the Krebs cycle, that nightmare from biochemistry where ATP is created by fat. And don't worry, there's no quiz. But essentially, to make ATP from fat, or glucose for that matter, takes B vitamins, and quite a bit of them. And so if you have a deficiency in Bs, the health of your fuel factories are poor. So when we look on this chart, we can see that we use B vitamins to relax, to manage stress, to build hormones, neurotransmitters. You cannot detoxify without B vitamins, right? Remember methylation. You can't run the methyl pathways without them. So a lot of us may actually be getting sufficient amounts of Bs in our diet, mainly because most of our foods have been fortified with Bs, even though they're the garbage Bs. And if you think about foods highest in Bs, a lot of us immediately think red meat, liver tissue is one of them, nuts and seeds, some green leafy vegetables, etc. That's not the problem. The problem is we're damaging the Bs we have, and we don't absorb them like we're supposed to. If you've got leaky gut, you're not absorbing your Bs. You can't. There's too much inflammation. So, look at all the things that break Bs. Now, this is just a typical weekend for most people. Little note, if you do take B vitamins, take them away from really high tannin herbs. For example, grape seed extract is a high tannin herb. You wouldn't want to take that with your B vitamins. But at the end of the day, I want you to hammer home the point that B vitamins, whether they're supplemental or from the diet, are the seeds for the mitochondria. That's where the magic happens. So Dr. Cass put together a B vitamin, and I said, you're out of your mind. Because when I looked at what's in it, and we're looking at that right now, this is the recipe. I said, there's no way you can put that all into a single liposome and make it work. Years later, we have it. It works. So for those of you that have been using the liposomal B vitamin, congrats, because you've got the state-of-the-art B on the market. What really stands out at me is the usage of trimethylglycine down here as a methyl donor, the orotate form of magnesium. We're going with Jerusalem artichoke rather than silymarin to get higher levels of some of the secret Bs, B13, B15. And of course there's going to be chocolate in it because that's how Dr. Cass rolls. But the other reason that there's cocoa in it is cocoa helps these things cross the blood-brain barrier. So when we look at the dosages, we're not talking about a whopping smack of B vitamins, right? We're looking at 12.5 milligrams, 2 milligrams of B6. If you're working with B6, you know that the upper limit can be 350 to 400 milligrams of B6. So what's the intention behind this product? Because none of this is really what I would call physiologically enhancing. And that's where the beauty is. That's the magic. The recipe allows the cell to do the job. So we're not trying to yell at the cell. We're not going to smack the cell or create a reaction. This blend allows the cell to do what it was designed to do, and that is take care of business, clean up shop, and make more energy. Now, if you're looking at this and you notice the NADH, okay, this is not nicotinamide riboside. Okay, that's a whole other discussion for another day. Pay attention to the choline here as well. Now, there's another note here on choline because choline is a methyl donor. And there's a lot of liposomes out there on the open market. Many of them use phosphatidylcholine as the liposomal part. What you have to be careful with when it comes to liposomes is if they're using too much phosphatidylcholine. You can actually give somebody too much choline, and if they're B vitamin deficient, the excessive choline will drive methylation into that hypermethylation status, and you can actually make people feel worse. So be very cautious with liposomes. When you look at how Dr. Cass does a liposome, everything is done in sequence. Right level, right time, so on and so forth. And so when you look at all the liposomes we get from Physica, none of them have really high levels of choline. You don't have to worry about that. And when you look at the official label, you can see things a little clearer. So dollar for dollar, this thing is a deal. Because if you try to build something like this out, and we have, it gets quite expensive. Now the first thing I said to Dr. Cass was, well, we better make a bigger bottle. And he reminded me he's Yoda. Much to learn you still have. If you need a lot of this, it's best to keep it in the small bottle for now because of shelf life and stability. So use the Lipo-B. It's going to solve a lot of problems with your patients. Mix it with the Camu C liposome for synergy. You can also put it in a shot glass with a little bit of water and a dash of Spectralite, and that'll open it up and give you a little more what we'll call punch or mitochondrial seeding. But we went from the exosome into biotoxicosis homotoxicology right to the Krebs cycle, all the way to Yoda. And that's kind of how our brains work from time to time. So if you want to know more about how to do some of these in-office tests, just go ahead and text the word muscle test to that number. And that'll get you into our system. And we're giving you access to some of the trainings we have. Many more on the way. Stay tuned for that. And it's exciting to see how the tech is developing for this because we're able to put together really good material in a short amount of time. So I walk in my daughter's room. She's 11. And you know, right away, if you're walking into an 11-year-old girl's room, you never know what to expect. And she's laying there reading this book. And I went, what are you reading? She says, I don't know, but it's really interesting. Now, I've read this book, and it freaked me out. I said, you like horror movies, don't you? She's like, yeah, this thing's really scary. So if you haven't read this book, check it out. It talks about a lot of the things we've talked about in the past regarding injectable retroviruses, neurologic injuries, so on and so forth. But she asked me a really good question. She says, well, if we know about all this stuff, then how come nobody's doing anything about it? I said, well, that's a good question. The scientists are warning the public, hey, bugs are coming, man. Bugs have bad things right now. The fastest growing area on the planet are the bugs. 175 new species classified as emerging. 75% of those are zoonotic. So pathogens today are twice as likely to be linked with these new emerging diseases that we're seeing. If you think about that, that starts to make sense. I mean, we're not going to get into a climate change discussion. But the bugs are winning, and the plants are stronger than ever. So Lyme is yesterday's news. We should be more concerned about what's coming. Now, before we all freak out and run for the hills, worrying about the future, life was so much better long ago, remember your yin and your yang, keep things in perspective, everything has a balance. The beautiful thing about the human body is it can adapt to pretty much anything. So, after reading this book and seeing this notice from the CDC, I said, well, wait a minute. Somebody out there has got to be researching this. So I just remember reading on gynostema and its ability to handle retroviruses, particularly XMRV. And at the time, I saw that it didn't really pay much attention until I saw this book that my daughter was reading again. And I went, wait a minute, XMRV, gynostema, word association. Interesting. So the Chinese are studying the anti-cancer activities of this plant. And we've been using gynostemma for a couple years now. So I found this image in one of the studies, and what it told me is the Chinese have been studying and studying, trying to figure this thing out, and what they found is they can't isolate which part of gynostemma actually does the trick. The gymnosides are the anti-cancer portion, but the flavonoids do one thing. The mixture does another. So the Chinese study just comes back and reinforces the fact that you have to use the whole plant. Okay? And if you just do a PubMed search for gynostemma and XMRV, you can read the study. This is all about mitochondrial health. Gynostemma could be the one plant that gets us ahead of the bugs. So the gymnosides were isolated and looked at different types of cancers, from leukemia, oral cancer, so on and so forth. That's a solid study, and I gave you the link at the top of the screen here. All right, the Journal of Chinese Medicine. So it's a 2016 study. But this is pretty fantastic stuff. Hey, somebody's actually looking at this. So I thought, okay, well, gynostemma is also a really good spleen herb, along with echinacea, astragalus. Those are good spleen herbs. To some extent, turmeric would be a spleen herb. So what does a true spleen qi deficiency look like? Because I have a sneaky suspicion that based on all the bugs coming our way, our spleens aren't working too well. So, spleen qi deficiency. Interesting. Craving the wrong foods. Weakness, loose stools, fatigue. So there's our Chinese component. If you wanted to attach disease codes to it, there you are. Now pay attention to that chronic viral pattern, because that's what the XMRV was talking about. So can it be that simple? Is it just a spleen? No, it's not just a spleen. But we have to ask these questions. Heart blood deficiency. Now we're talking Chinese medicine semantics, and we could be talking about lesser heart, fire, and so on and so forth. But for our argument today, let's just talk about spleen qi deficiency. People who have a weak spleen also have poor flow through the heart, and I mean energetic flow. So the heart's too tight. You start to see things like AFib, left ventricular hypertrophy, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Holy crap, those are B vitamin issues. And so now we have an intersection between B vitamin health, Chinese medicine, spleen health, and a viral pattern. Wow. Yeah, and this is just a typical Tuesday. All right, so what does this look like? These are most of your patients. Can't sleep, and I'm too tired. So you're too tired to sleep is what you're telling me. Yes, okay. You have anxiety, worry, can't remember squat, heart's jumping out of your chest. These are your average patients today. So medically, we need to look at, okay, is this a mental health issue, or is it just neurotransmitter dysfunction? Lean on the neurotransmitters. But how do you make neurotransmitters if you don't have B vitamins? That's another way to look at this. Okay, manually, chiropractors, massage therapists, craniosacral docs, anybody that works with their hands, pay attention to this. If you have a swollen belly by the end of the day and heat makes it better, it's probably a spleen issue. It's not SIBO or SIFO. Those are all related to the spleen anyways. Okay? If you wake up with a six-pack and you go to bed looking 6 months pregnant, you have to consider that that's actually spleen deficiency. Yes, it could be a bacterial or fungal issue, but that's also driven by the spleen imbalance. Have to ask those questions about what's coming out in the toilet. Go right there. I've also noticed a lot of people bruising lately. And our training would say, well, that's a bioflavonoid deficiency or vitamin C deficiency. Don't forget that easy bruising is also a symptom of low thyroid. And the spleen and the thyroid have a lot to do with each other vis-a-vis the heart. Pay attention to how people look. Stick their tongue out. If they have one of those teeth mark rings around their tongue, that's a spleen disharmony. Challenge some muscles. We'll show you how to do that in a bit. These are today's patients. Another one is they complain about pain right near the spleen, and if you palpate it, you might not reproduce the pain. But I guarantee if you percuss it, if you tap it, they'll go, ow. So the kind of patient that complains of chest pain, shortness of breath, thinks they're having a heart attack, all things being equal, they go to ER, they drop $12,500 and get checked out, and everything's fine, it's all in your head, go home. If you have patients like that and it has recurring left-sided rib and chest pain, possibly pain referring into the jaw via the scalene muscles, I want you to consider that that's probably a spleen dysfunction. Okay? So medically, what's a spleen do? Technically, when I went to school way back in the 90s, they said, well, a spleen doesn't do anything, you don't need it, take it out. Wrong. If you practice Chinese medicine, that's the dumbest thing anybody's ever said. The spleen's a big deal. Medically, we know now that it's a major immune organ. We know it recycles red blood cells. We know it's important for ferritin. Does a lot of things when you're in a hypoxic state. Now pay attention there, because how many of your patients actually breathe well? A lot of people today don't breathe. Sleep apnea is hypoxia. So another reason you might have a spleen issue is due to sleep apnea. And so on and so forth. We know it's an immune organ. You can't talk about mono without talking about the spleen. Think of it as a reservoir. I also think of it as a tool chest with many drawers. So the spleen has the ability to store a lot of things for us. It's very nutrient hungry as well. So today we live in a spleen deficient culture, primarily due to technology, lack of communication the old-fashioned way. You know, when's the last time you actually had a conversation on the phone with somebody? Blood sugar imbalances lead to spleen dysfunction, which is your metabolic syndrome, or diabetes, meta-obesity, whatever you want to call it. If you have elevated insulin levels, you're going to have altered bacterial function. So another reason to look at dysbiosis is from a blood sugar point of view. Every functional medicine doc is up to their ears in leaky gut. Again, it could just be spleen. IBS, spleen. Interesting thing about food allergies. We know they're related to leaky gut. Why do we focus on the allergy? Why don't we fix the gut? Spleen. Come in and look at the least common denominator. The spleen seems to be the one. Okay? Pretty straightforward. So we could go on and on about the symptoms of spleen disharmony. Let's talk about how it happened. When you're exhausted, you're draining your spleen chi. Worrying about the future, dwelling on the past, wearing that red hat that says Make America Great Again. Or maybe you bought one of the toques I'm trying to make that says Make Canada Great Again, and it comes with a free Tim Hortons gift card. That worry that stresses you out, all these dumb little things that you're exposed to every day, wears out your spleen. We got to get away from this. Habits. If you read every time you eat, if you're a good student and you don't sit down and eat without having something to read, that can drain your spleen. Your spleen's trying to convert your food into chi, for crying out loud. Eat in company. Eat in a relaxed environment. Don't sit down and try and catch up with Game of Thrones while you're eating. That's not a good idea. Okay? We really have to change the way we schedule our days. There's just too much going on. It's pathetic if you walk into a men's room and you look at the urinal and there might be 6 guys on their phone while they're going to the bathroom. Put the phone down, man. You're not going to miss that much. Okay? Don't sleep with your phone. Shut it off. Get it out of the room. EMF is one of the most toxic things to the spleen. Okay? Now, the diet doesn't help. My leaky gut friends, my functional medicine compatriots, we all know that wheat and dairy are the two biggies. These two foods are the most inflammatory foods in our In fact, you could say that these foods kill people. Now, if you're trying to control inflammation short term, you should probably eliminate these two foods. And they do deplete the spleen chi. If you drink ice water or ice drinks all day, that's draining the heat from the spleen. The spleen needs heat. If you're a raw foodie, you might want to ease up, unless you have too much spleen chi, and you can use a raw food diet to drain it. But a lot of people that I've treated that were on a raw food diet were some of the sickest people I've ever met. And as soon as I took them off the raw food diet, they got better. So according to the Weston A. Price people, the approximate ideal ratio for cooked versus raw is about 60% of your food should be cooked and about 40% raw. Now it depends on where you live. If you're living in Tuktoyaktuk or Thunder Bay, Ontario, you might want to have a little more cooked foods to keep you warm. If you're living in Tijuana or Miami, obviously a little more raw food. So it is regional. Processed foods do drain the spleen chi. We all know sugar is bad in all ways. Now, coffee. Coffee is medicinal for the spleen. Too much coffee can drain the spleen. So now what's too much coffee? Well, it depends on the person. Now I'm talking about brewed black coffee. I'm not talking about all the other garbage people put in their coffee. So dollars for dollars, ounces for ounces, roughly 16 ounces of fresh brewed black coffee is considered decent, healthy, balanced amount. Anything over 24 ounces is considered excessive. And that's brewed coffee. If you're an espresso fanatic, then we're talking 3 shots a day, max. Anything over 3 shots a day, full shots of espresso, has a tendency to deplete spleen chi. Okay? Same with alcohol. We're thinking about a 1.5 to 2 drink a day minimum, maximum. Which one do you want to do, minimum or maximum? Again, individualized. Some people can't drink at all. If your spleen is really sick, alcohol can really throw it for a loop. So again, case by case.
So what we're going to demonstrate now is how to assess spleen function through the nervous system using some basic manual muscle testing. And the 2 key muscles I like to challenge for the spleen are the lats and the opponens muscles, opponens pollicus. There's a third muscle that I'll demonstrate, which is serratus anterior, and we'll explain why that's important, as well as get into how to quickly assess the lymphatics, because if we're talking about the spleen, we have to talk about the lymphatics. So the first muscle we're going to test is opponens pollicus. Basically, you have the patient squeeze their pinky and their thumb together. Your job as the practitioner is try to break that tension. So I'm going to try and pull your fingers apart. Don't let me do it, okay? So you use a pretty decent amount of force, maybe 10 pounds, and try and break that. And it doesn't break, so that muscle's intact. From a spleen point of view, we know that the spleen's doing its job. From a neurologic point of view, we know that the base of the cervical column is intact. So that's a nice side bit of information to get. The second muscle we'll do are the lats. So you have the patient stand with their thumbs against their thighs, and the practitioner tries to pull the arm away from the body. So you brace the shoulder and you pull with about 5 pounds of pressure. You ready? Don't let me pull. Good. We'll sneak behind and do the other side. And she's got both of those intact. Now to access the serratus, what we're going to do is have you put your thumbs out. In that position, she's just activated serratus. And she's going to try and hold her arm against the body. Ready? Hold strong. Use all your muscles. Alright, so serratus is weak. We're going to try again on the left side. Squeeze tight. And her shoulder just cavitated. So squeeze tight again. That doesn't hurt, does it? Okay, great. So we have a weak serratus, but the latissimus and the opponens are strong. So now we're getting suspicious of maybe some biomechanical issues, but we still can't rule out the spleen. So my final check for spleen, since it involves the lymphatic system, is to challenge the lymphatic system. So in that case, we're going to challenge the pecs with the thumbs down. So you have the patient squeeze their arms together, thumbs pointed down. Don't let me pull your arms apart. Use all those muscles. And we have a weakness there. So we are going to investigate the spleen in this case because we have 2 weak muscles out of 3 main groups. And that'll take you down the spleen road.
So when we're looking at the spleen and assessing it, it's really simple to do posturally. If somebody's standing, if they have a high shoulder, or it looks like they have a low shoulder, or their hip is crooked, chances are there's some kind of torque in the spinal cord, and that's often driven by the spleen. Another test I like to tell patients, if they're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they can't remember the last time they felt good, and they have all this rib pain, is you have them stand in front of a mirror with their shirt off, and you have them put their arms above their head. If it looks like the left side of the rib cage is sticking way out, and chances are you've got some type of spleen situation going on, and at the same time you're going to see liver issues. So you can't have a spleen issue without a liver issue, and you can't have a liver issue without a spleen issue, and vis-a-vis, the heart gets involved in all of these. And so when I come at the spleen, we think digestion right away. Obviously, digestion is going to need support. So we've got lots of enzymes to pick from. My favorite would be hypozymes. You take your pick with probiotics. We'll let you decide how you want to roll with that. Mucilaginous herbs like okra, marshmallow, slippery elm. Something like glutamine PLGU would be a good go-to there. Minerals are always a no-brainer. It takes minerals to make energy. So spectrolite is a big player. Like I had mentioned, echinacea and astragalus. And so you're thinking, man, my toolkit's getting big. Hormonal support. So anything for the HPA, like HPA Life, Adrenal Life, Thyro Life, and any of the LFs with rhodiola could be considered spleen support. Spleen Chi, the remedy, the spagyric remedy called Spleen Chi, is a spleen remedy. It blows me away sometimes when docs ask me, hey, does Physica have anything for the spleen? Like, well, do you see any products with the name spleen in it? Oh, yeah. So, sometimes it's just that simple. So, why stop there? So Dr. Cass has been putting together this for a while, and we now have it available. It's Spleen LF, formerly known as Life Force. And if you break it down from a purpose point of view, when you look at all the ingredients, this is what it can do. Based on the ingredients, this is its design. And so when you look at the design of a recipe, you go, wait a minute, we started talking about the book Plague, which is the collapse of the nervous system through the immune system. And now we have a product that can correct that. Wait a minute, there better be gynostemma in this. Yep, there it is. So, at least we have the wisdom of Dr. Cass that continues to formulate and design things for us. As a problem arises, we seem to get the remedy. Although sometimes we get the remedy, we don't know why it's there. And then we know why it's there and we get to use it. So, one of the unique things about this you'll notice is the glandular tissue, bovine tissue, spleen, thymus, and bone marrow. Pretty unique. But the lymph tissue, who adds lymph tissue to a remedy? And if you think about the spleen is going to soak this up. All right? So, we've got the botanicals at the bottom, but we've got these glandulars here to really make this soak into the spleen and feed the spleen. You can't work in the spleen without zinc. You need to keep that zinc-copper ratio in balance. So Andrographis is our first botanical. That's our king of the bitters. We're going to use that for a lot of things, including heat shock proteins. You've got astragalus, which is your traditional splenic herb. You'll notice dosage-wise, that is the largest dose of herb. And then the gynostemma, like we talked about, for the retroviruses and so on and so forth. But it's also a powerful adaptogen, and the story's not even done on gynostemma yet. My favorite's rhodiola. It's one of those plants that's extremely versatile. In low doses, it does one thing. In high doses, it does another. We're talking about a low dose and more of an immune sweet spot here. And no immune product design is incomplete from Dr. Cass without the secret magic mushroom blend like he likes to do. Your maitake, your reishi mushroom, so Ganoderma, at a decent dose. Now, what I love about this product is the dosing. One capsule Gives you relatively even amounts. So I'm thinking, okay, the average person needs about 1,000 milligrams of spleen tissue to get the job done, roughly 800 to 1,000 milligrams of astragalus. So at 4 a day, we're going to achieve that. If you underdose, you might not see the response you're looking for. The overdose level, if you really wanted to stir something up, would be 8 a day. So the sweet spot is 2 twice a day. All right, write that down. 2 caps, twice a day. Hopefully everybody knows the spleen time of day. We're thinking anywhere between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. will be the sweet spot for dosing this. So make sure they take a morning dose and go ahead and take a dose late in the evening. And that'll satisfy the timing of the spleen. Another way to look at the spleen is just to come at it all on one slide. And the reason I put this up there is because since I've been using this particular product for the past, what are we at now? 5 months, I made a comment that a lot of our spleen patients really show up in the neuroemotional field. And so by combining the heart song milieu with the spleen LF formula, we've been able to dial a lot of this in for people, and they're coming to solutions. They're coming to conclusions on a lot of these lingering emotional issues. Okay, so we've even gone so far as to make a quick survey listing these symptoms. And if somebody checks off 6 or more, we immediately investigate the spleen. And you can see on the other side a lot of the things we've discussed about foods and digestion. And just remember that stomach spleen is the blend, and that you can't talk about the spleen without talking about the lymph. And so these are 2 game-changing products that have really accelerated my ability to help people. The liposomal B is now one of our top products. And I always get worried when we start to run out of the spleen LF because, man, when somebody needs that, there's no replacement for it. And a third tool you might want to put in there is the spleen chi. Sometimes people just need a kick in the pants to get over the hump, and some of the spleen chi can do that for them. So we did talk about a lot of things today, a lot of bullet points, a lot of hot topics. Listen to this a couple times, make some notes, pass it on, share it with some people, and text muscle test to that number so you can get more sessions like this and also get access to some of the other trainings that we've done and are coming to you soon. And we hope to talk to everybody sooner than soon, and we're excited to see some of the new products that are coming from Dr. Cass here in 2018. So stay tuned. It's never a dull moment, and there's a lot of good work to do.